Budget and Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committees meeting April 30th, 2024. We'll begin with roll call.
Mayor Jacola,
Present.
Council President Steinhebel,
Here.
Councilor Dykstra, Councilor Mann, Councilor Salvage,
Here.
Councilor Olfers,
Here.
Councilor Workman,
Here.
Committee Member Lance Caddy, Dominic Condi, Rebecca Grizzle,
Here.
Jeffrey King, Robert Waterhouse,
Here.
Tom Wells.
Thank you. All right, before we move forward, we approved minutes at the last meeting. We have an adjustment. An error was discovered. Committee member Lance Caddy arrived after roll call and was inadvertently marked absent from the meeting. The minutes have been corrected. Is there a motion to approve the minutes as amended?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that motion carries unanimously. And we will move on to presentations, starting with Finance Director Brandon Nish.
We have a couple of, well, just one, I guess, guest presentation now, with the Lebanon Downtown Association having presented yesterday, and a small change related to the Strawberry Festival Fireworks Committee. I'm going to turn over to Committee Member Grizzle to talk about the Lebanon Chamber of Commerce, which does receive funding annually out of the Motel Tax Fund, which we will discuss after her presentation.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm stepping down from my role as Budget Committee and putting on my Chamber CEO hat. We do receive funds from the transient room tax, which is collected from the hotel taxes. And that is, we use those funds in two different ways. We receive $42,000 a year for operating a visitor center, which we will eventually very soon be able to operate again. You can see that our visitor center, if you don't know, was destroyed last year. Somebody drove through it. They drove through it again in March of this year. So we're in the rebuilding process, and we are hoping to be open again by Strawberry Festival. So we have an agreement to do everything from answering phone calls, emails, in-person visits, being open on Saturdays during events like Strawberry Festival at the pleasure of City Council when they want us to be open on non-business hours. So we operate your visitor center. And we also receive another $43,000 a year in grants. So those grants are like, as Brandon mentioned, the 4th of July was going to be presenting, but we get requests from Strawberry Festival to an antique show, to a car show, to a lot of different events to help put on their event with the city. So we may get a grant request for $500, maybe $1,000, maybe $5,000. But we have a volunteer committee that takes in those grant applications and approves, denies, generally approves those requests. So are there any questions that you have for me about how we manage that money, what we do? Happy to address that if you think of something later. So that's it.
All the grants go out every year? If you get $43,000 in grants, do those all go back out every year, or do they roll over, or how's that work?
Well, to be honest, I mean, that during COVID, we had an agreement with the city. The hotel was shut down. So our agreement said you will send us X amount. So we agreed to put that on hold for a while, and we took in zero for a period of time. I can't remember the exact period of time. And then and there was a period of time where grants weren't going out. So I would say we have probably right now a balance of about 50,000. We are looking for, there's a pie chart that city council wants us to try to like special events or, events, special projects, sports. That's a piece of the pie that we are actively trying to, the city council has a direction to our committee that says, we would like to attract sporting events to, uh, uh, we would like to fund sporting events. So we've put out feelers to the high school, the Boys and Girls Club. Look, if you're trying to put on a softball tournament in Lebanon, please come to us for money, because we're not going to not spend, we're not going to hold that aside, but we are attempting to spend in that proportion. So we try not to hold on to it. However, we are
Circumstance.
hanging on to a little bit of it because
I got you.
it built up
I got you.
while there were no events going on. So,
Thanks, Rebecca.
Okay, if nobody has any questions for the Chamber of Commerce, we'll hop right into kind of the agenda for today. We're going to go through a few different funds, specific funds within this budget. These are kind of the major funds of the organization. Some of the other ones I do not plan necessarily to touch on, such as the system development funds or some of the smaller like special revenue funds. However, certainly if you have questions based on what you have read through the last 3 weeks or so, we'll be happy to take time out and answer some of your questions. So with that said, since we just heard about the motel tax fund, I'm going to share my screen. And the first thing we'll talk about is the motel tax fund. So within your budget document, if you have a printed copy, you can find this on page 246. If you were using the web version, you can find this under the fund summaries navigation section, and there's a spot for motel tax. Budgeted in the proposed budget for next year, we have total expenditures of $397,533. Within that money, as Rebecca just talked about, the Chamber of Commerce, we have 2 different contracts right now for use of those funds. The Chamber of Commerce has 2, I guess, subcontracts, so to speak. The $42,000 that she discussed for the visitor center operations, and then $43,000 for that chamber grant program. So those are both proposed in next year's budget with no changes. The Lebanon Downtown Association also has a $30,000 line or contract with us for the purpose of funding the Main Street Manager, which I think is now technically the executive director is the official title. And you heard from them yesterday in regards to their kind of purpose and what they are after in the downtown. Additionally, in that budget, we budget $50,000 for the downtown building restoration program. That's a program managed by the city, at least currently. And those funds go to businesses in the downtown core, maybe outside just downtown. Businesses in the city of Lebanon to restore their buildings. It's a grant application program annually, so we have a period during the, I think, kind of late winter, early first part of the calendar year where folks apply for those funds, and then it's a reimbursement basis. After that, the remaining expenditures, we usually budget in a capital line item, honestly, because it is then set aside for any potential projects that may come up during the year. We've certainly had some hopes, I think, about using some of that in the past for some enhancements at some of our city parks to encourage different functions that could come into town. But so far, nothing has yet to come to fruition, and those funds just kind of sit there for the purpose of when things pop up, we are ready to tackle them.
I do want to mention, if I can, well, a couple things. One thing is for anybody who's watching and isn't familiar with budget process, these are very specific funds you can only use for very specific things. People might say, well, instead of, that 85,000 that's going to the chamber, wouldn't that help our general fund budget? And in fact cannot be used for that. This is it is
Heads and beds is
Heads
kind
and
of
beds.
the.
Heads and beds, we say a lot in the chamber grant program when people are applying. We are much more, if it's a one-day event, maybe it's a concert in the park, we generally, we used to give 500, we now have changed that to a maximum of 1,000, because that's really not going to put heads in beds. Heads in beds means somebody's coming for an event, maybe it's a multi-day event, and we stand a chance of having them get a hotel room, which perpetuates that fund. And so, so those kinds of events tend to get more money from us. The Strawberry Festival is going to get more money than a concert in the park downtown. That's why that is. The other thing I want to mention is that what I didn't mention is that fund funded $100,000 this year for helping with the restoration of the building that I mentioned earlier. So I did not mention that part, and it's a pretty big chunk of money, and we were very grateful. We would not have been able to do things like make sure that our bathroom was an ADA bathroom. It's a 1940s, 50s building that we're remodeling, and so that's going to go a long way towards having a great and usable visitor center in the future. So.
Yeah, these funds are, per Oregon state law, very specific about what they can be funded on. There are certain parameters, but the essential outline is these funds can only be used for tourism purposes. A portion, based on our city code, a portion of these funds do go into the general fund. It's not a lot. I think it's 18% is the overall allocation. Again, with the idea that the general fund is helping to support some of those tourism type focuses, our police department and the need for maybe potential traffic control, stuff from Public Works with our park system. So those funds do still go towards promoting tourism from this city. The rest of it is maintained in the motel tax fund, doesn't go anywhere, rolls over year to year. So if the funds are left unspent, then they are available for the future year to be allocated. Any questions on the motel tax fund?
Yeah. Real quick on the LDA funding, are we continuing the quarterly pay going into the next year, or are we going back to a lump sum? Last year, we imposed the quarterly because they were so out of compliance.
Right. I don't remember, I could pull up that contract, but I don't remember when the existing contract expires, but I believe it was a multi-year contract. Single year? Well, we'd have to negotiate that, I think. And I think we could certainly hear feedback from the committee as to what the preference might be. But right now, it's certainly set on a quarterly distribution and could be retained that way.
Well, I know they've done a lot of work to get back into compliance.
Yeah.
My goal is that they stay there.
We're down to the last quarterly payment,
Yeah.
and we haven't distributed that yet because it's pending some of the measurable items in the contract that
Right.
we need to receive from them before we can distribute. And then, yes, we'll have to negotiate a new contract, I guess.
Is this something the budget committee wants to keep at quarterly, or do you want to go to yearly? What's your preference?
I personally, for at least another year, to make sure that everything stays in compliance, I'd like to see the quarterly still. They're still getting their money, but we're just not lump summing it.
I agree.
I'm all right with that.
We will make that adjustment.
Any other questions on the motel tax fund before we hop over? All right, we're going to move into internal service funds. These are major functions of the organization and things that I want to make sure that the budget committee gets a chance to review and understand. The purpose of those internal service funds, you can find these starting on page 180, or again, under the fund summaries tab if you're using the web version. The purpose of these internal service funds is to house administrative or business functions of the organization. So within these three funds that we currently have set up, we have the Administrative Internal Services Fund. This covers the city manager, city attorney, city council, the city recorder, human resources, and finance, all specifically administrative functions. The dollar amounts you see on the screen are the proposed expenditures for the coming fiscal year for each of those different departments. Information technology is a service-oriented department. They provide service to both the city and the Lebanon Fire District, which we'll get into here in a little bit. And then building maintenance and mechanic, those are folks that are providing services within each of our city facilities, custodial services, specific building maintenance items, and then the mechanic is providing, obviously, vehicle support to our, for all of our city vehicles at this time. The Administrative Internal Services Fund, the way that these are funded are by contributions from each of the kind of operational funds. And what I mean by operational funds is those with kind of regular ongoing annual expenditures for personnel, materials and service, capital, and I'm not necessarily talking about capital projects. Capital project funds are generally excluded from this. They have a very the budget for those and the annual spending goes up and down depending on what actual projects are planned. The rest of these, this is for operational support, basically. So that's how those are calculated. We use the operational expenditures from the prior year to establish what those distributions might be. So when we talk about, for example, in the general fund, you know, we'll say something like, well, a reduction in maybe the internal service funds doesn't necessarily mean a dollar for dollar adjustment in the general fund. It's because the general fund, at least for administrative support, only provides 50% of the overall expenditures to this fund. So I have the different distributions on the screen. Again, they're based on operational expenditures from the prior year audit. Human resources and payroll, these are specifically people-focused functions, and so those expenses are allocated by FTE in each of the funds. The general fund obviously has the lion's share at 61.12 FTE for the year, followed by the rest of the departments there below. You heard presentations from each of the departments yesterday. Does anybody have any specific questions about what might land in admin internal services or any of those departments? Any follow-ups that are necessary? Nope. All right. One thing.
Brandon,
Yes.
were you going to bring up our conversation
Yeah.
via email?
Yeah, so one of the questions I did receive yesterday was in regards to council stipends. So, well, let me get this right. Currently, well, you think I'd have it on my screen. Okay. So currently, the annual budget for council stipends is $36,893. And the question that was posed was in regards to what would it look like if we were to either cut those stipends or if it was more of an opt-out program for folks to determine whether they wanted to receive that stipend. With this fiscal year proposal, as you have before you, we chose to move council expenditures, including those stipends, to the Administrative Internal Services Fund, because the council does provide direction and support to all of the city services. With that said, if we were to eliminate the stipends entirely, you would save almost $37,000 across the organization. But at least as far as the general fund is concerned, you'd only be looking at a reduction of about $18,500. and change. If this was an individual kind of opt-out decision for each of the counselors, you'd be looking at about $1,400 per year for the counselors that would opt out. There are a few counselors that qualify for PERS because of their, we'll call it day job. And so those individuals do cost a little bit more because we have to pay the PERS components, which includes both the pension and the 6% pickup that the employer pays. The mayor's is a little different, and because of the volume, excuse me, volume of work that is generally expected of the mayor. As near as we can tell, that stipend was increased to $1,000 a month, the equivalent of $1,000 a month, back in 2017 timeframe, to accommodate for some of that extra work and travel time and extra meetings and the like. So a reduction there is about $6,500 related to the general fund specifically anyways. So with that, I can kind of leave it for discussion or see where folks want to take that.
You're advocating, I'm a proponent of leaving all of that be as it sits. I mean, having served and knowing how much time it takes, I think it helps you really attract quality people for the tiny amount that it affects our budget. I think I'm not for changing any of that.
I tend to disagree. I think, when I get that check or whatever, those 2 checks now, for $75 every 2 weeks, I'm like, what? That's not what's driving me to sit up here is $150 a month. The service to my community is, and I know our neighbors generally in this area don't have stipends as large as well. And we've asked our staff to take a 9.75 FTE reduction to this budget, and we're talking about moving council chambers and everything like that. I think it would be, it's just something I think that council in particular needs to look at. And if that's an opt-out thing, that's an opt-out thing, but I'm certainly in favor of just removing the stipends altogether at a time when we're looking at, particularly too, layered on top of that, a possible $15 a month service fee that we're going to be asking constituents for in the future. So all of those things kind of play together, layered together. It's a small amount out of the general fund, I understand that, but I really am a proponent of cutting the stipends.
So am I. I believe the same way. Michelle and I have had discussions about this. We're also asking our directors not to take a COLA this year, but we're going to still keep getting paid for what we do. It's not like this is life-changing money. And I do this in fact, I was surprised, I had forgotten that this was a paid position. When I got appointed, it was like, really? You pay me to do this? That was a surprise. Whether we get rid of them or it's an opt-out, I'll opt out because it's not changing my life and the money. I do this because I care about our community. And if we're going to ask everybody else to sacrifice and reduction in force and everything else, I think it's the least we can do.
I'm not saying I necessarily have an opinion on this one way or another, but I don't want to be disingenuous enough to say that anybody who's sitting up here who's not staff is doing it for that $86 or $75. Doesn't have anything to do with it. That's not why any of us are doing it.
Nope.
And I'm not opposed to that necessarily. It's I don't want to, it seems kind of tokeny.
Almost. It almost is, but it's something that I feel very strongly that I need to do. You can call it what you want to,
Like I said,
but everything that we
First time
can
I've
put
thought
back
about
in, everything we can put back into the general fund, even the smallest amount, I'm for it. We're talking about that with the water treatment plant on the fluoride.
Fluoride, yeah, I think the fluoride is about the same amount as we would cost too, and I know that's a cost savings that we're looking at
And everybody got
doing.
excited
Just,
about
hey,
that,
just-
so.
let's not wander here. I didn't say anything about fluoride for for cost savings, okay? Let's not play that card together. They
No,
have
you
zero-
didn't, someone else
They have
did.
zero to do with each other.
Yeah,
Zero.
Correct. Somebody else did.
same
I
amount.
understand what Rebecca's saying, that it is a lot of time. This takes a lot of time. But I think I side with Michelle in that, yeah, but that small amount we're getting isn't, it's so insignificant. It's not covering
Never
our
going to
time.
cover
It's not
my,
covering
my
the-
time.
Right. So it's, to me, it's almost, it is somewhat symbolic, but I think if we're asking the city staff to make cuts and cutting positions, and we're talking about cuts, this, for me, is an easy one to save $18,000 a year for the council stipends.
Does the council experience travel expenses?
Not generally.
Not really.
The last time I remember turning in mileage was for a trip to Medford to go look at some of their,
homeless stuff.
yeah, how they work with the unhoused there. That's the only time I think I've ever turned in mileage.
So if a counselor or the mayor goes to a conference, that would be included in that conference. So it wouldn't necessarily be included in what their stipend is. So if somebody were to go to a conference, there is budget, I think, in the council to go to like League of Oregon Cities or something like that, and that would be paid for, and then the traveling expense would be paid
Get
for.
a
with that.
travel and food allotment?
Yes, yeah, just be per diem, just like what we do, yeah.
Thank you.
What you're describing here is leadership by example,
Mm-hmm.
and that's needed. Bottom line is, before the day's out, we're going to some sort of a budget that's going to spend more than we're taking in. And these actions may be minor, but they're symbolic of not just kicking.
So I'm for it.
Everybody's looking at me.
At least for the counselors. I
You're the
know
only
that,
one
I
that
know the
hadn't said
mayor,
anything,
the
Ken.
mayor has significant, I mean, we all spend quite a bit of time, but the mayor spends a significant amount of time in meetings and behind the scenes. I don't know that I would support cutting the mayor's stipend.
Well, I'll just say this on that. I'm not opposed to this at all. It isn't that much money. When I ran for office, it wasn't like I was like, the joke in our house was, oh, wow, I'm going to make all this money. That was the joke in our house. So I'm not opposed to it at all. I think it is leadership by example, of course. I don't know if we're going to make any decision here, or is that in a council meeting? I don't know.
Well, I think if a majority of the budget committee wants to see that removed, then we could certainly change, what we're allocating essentially. Otherwise, we would leave it in, and then it kind of just becomes a council action, whether that's an opt-out or a full,
Well,
everybody's.
let me ask this question. What's easier on staff?
We already have some other changes, so if the committee wants to pull it, then we could make that adjustment today.
Okay.
I think if we're going to do it, we might as well do it now.
Yep, I agree.
Is
Yeah,
now
I
the,
agree too.
is now the best time, Brandon, or is it
Yeah.
later in the meeting? Okay.
Yeah, kind of.
So I guess we would need a motion from someone on the budget committee.
I would make a motion that we discontinue the stipend for counselors and mayor.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor of that motion?
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right, that motion carries unanimously.
There goes my gambling money.
I'll
All
stop
right.
using so much
All
water.
right, Brandon, continue.
Yeah, any other questions or things to discuss as part of, in the administrative internal services budget? All right, moving right along then, we'll hop over to IT. You heard from the department yesterday, but again, this is just kind of an overview of how we fund IT services for the organization. These contributions, again, from funds with operational expenditures primarily, are calculated using the number of workstations or conference units. Some rooms have, specific desktop machines for conference use. And then help desk ticket hours as well. So all of those items are tracked by IT using a ticketing system that they have. We are planning next year to change the model at which IT receives some support from the Lebanon Fire District. There's a contract process ongoing right now, but the general premise and what we've come to an agreement on is that instead of just a flat rate based on this kind of devices and ticket hours setup, it's going to move to more of a tracked service of sorts. So what we have put together is a calculation that provides a base rate to cover some of the planning time, the administrative expenses associated with IT that we will bill to Lebanon Fire. And then after that, everything will be based on a hour for hour per usage. We do have some inclusions in the contract to set up some, I guess we'll call them protections for the city, because as kind of that steward of their technology resources, we want to make sure that what they have on site doesn't necessarily then overburden our team and sacrifice what they can provide to the city. This is a big shift for IT. It is definitely a new thing. Next year will be kind of the pilot for that to see how this goes. But the fire district is supportive and working with us to ensure that what we have moving forward works for both sides of the table. So they will provide, we have a budgeted amount in there that is near what they provided this year in funding from LFD. And then the remaining is then split amongst the departments and these funds. And sorry, the IT internal services is on page 191 of your book.
Is the not the upcharge, the change in charging the fire department, is that reflected in the 229,000 of intergovernmental expenses as opposed to this year we're at 125?
Yeah, so the two, I need to look at that budget.
Because it looks like you're forecasting, a significant increase.
Oh, yeah. So what we've budgeted, so page 192 will give you the kind of the breakdown of what we're planning. The LFD contribution, the existing thought and projection shows $84,525 for the coming fiscal year. The other 145,000 is listed as federal grant funds. That's the ARPA money for the IT equipment, essentially for the upgrade from this building to the library's community room for the purpose of the council chambers.
Okay.
Specifically, also, I wanted to hit on some of the expenditures in this budget. And we talked yesterday about kind of the distribution as far as what some of these actual expenditures are. So for example, GIS. We allocate GIS expenses to those areas that utilize them. So I'm going to use links as an example. The transit program doesn't benefit from GIS in any manner. And so those expenditures are not allocated to links as far as the contribution is concerned. But they are solely allocated out to those areas that utilize that system. Similarly, we have a fairly large SCADA upgrade that is occurring in this current fiscal year and then some planned for next year. Those expenses as well are divvied out to water and wastewater, the two utilities, because those are the only places that utilize that SCADA system. So we do try really hard to make sure that the expenditures being doled out are fair, are accurate, and represent what is actually happening in each of these operational areas. Any questions on IT and the funding mechanisms for IT? All right, our last internal service fund is the building maintenance and the mechanic. They're both housed in this area. Again, contributions. This one is based on hours per week the team, the custodial team spends in each of these buildings. So I've provided this for you on the screen what that breakdown looks like. It's also in your budget books. That one starts on page, I didn't go far enough. 198. And then finally, the mechanic is, those costs are distributed based on actual vehicles across the city. So I've listed the number of vehicles that we base those charges on the screen. Police department has 18 vehicles that we assume in that. IT does have one that they can use for trucking things around. Links has 7. Public Works has the lion's share at 26, and engineering, E&G, has 6 vehicles parked at City Hall. So we distribute the salary and benefits for the mechanic and a small equipment or a small material and service budget, primarily for kind of the preventative maintenance items, things like wipers, oil changes, some of those minor things that everybody is going to incur. We don't necessarily sit there and dole those out to the departments because everybody has those. They're kind of a regular occurrence. Any major items, such as, tires for vehicles or new brakes, things like that, does get allocated out to the department specifically that is incurring that expense. So it does not land on these books. Questions I can answer there. We do try to keep a small reserve in the building maintenance fund. That's because at some point we will have, we always have some sort of maintenance items that needs to happen on buildings. I can tell you right now that fund is not sufficient enough for what will eventually come down the pike, right? The newest building that I think we have is, Ron, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Justice Center, the Justice Center and the library kind of came on at the same time. Those are our 2 newest facilities. And at this point, those were constructed in 2008. So they're darn near 20 years old at this point and will start to incur additional expenses. City Hall is not a spring chicken building, I will say. It's a good puzzle. It's fun to navigate your way through it, but there will be some significant deferred maintenance charges that at some point are going to come knocking. And this fund does not have what it needs to support all of that. So we do try to set a little bit aside each year without breaking the other departments and their operational needs. We try to store some here for those potential chaotic events.
What's the balance on that, Brent? I'm looking for that particular line item.
Let's see.
Is that in custodial?
Yeah. At the end of 25, we estimate that there will be 121,000 in fund balance in that fund.
I see that now.
I'll defer to you on building and how far that will go. Really, I think the biggest thing that we worry about is, all of our buildings have older, we'll say, and I'm knocking on wood while I say this, HVAC systems, right? And at some point, those will die, and we will need to replace them, and they are not cheap for buildings our size. And so there will be some sizable expenditures when those come due. All right. Moving right along today, we'll pop over to our utility funds. So I'm going to start on page 213, or with the water utility fund for those with the web version. And we'll work our way through these. I am hitting highlights today because certainly if you have questions, again, definitely stop me and ask me. You did hear from a lot of the departments yesterday, so I'm not really rehashing the expenditure side of the equation. But if you feel like you're missing something, please let me know. Overall, for the water utility fund, total expenditures, according to your budget document, are down 15.5%. We have allocated $1.1 million to expand membrane filters at the water treatment plant, as we discussed yesterday, to prepare ourselves for this coming fall and winter. If you remove the unappropriated expenditures, what that is a reserve we essentially set aside for either equipment replacements or planned capital expenditures in the future. If you remove that, expenditures are down 5.1% when compared to the current year existing budget. The rate increase that was reviewed by council through a work session and then ultimately passed at a council meeting for the water side, it was 2%. And somebody is bound to ask, Brandon, why, if your expenditures are going down, are you increasing your rates? And this has everything to do with again, the fund balance at the end of a given fiscal year. So at the end of 2025, in your proposed budget, we see that $830,000 is essentially what we will be left with in that fund, plus a small reserve for equipment replacement, which has gone from 1.6 million down to $500,000 next year. That fund balance equates to 1 month of expenditures. So if something were to go horribly wrong, there's not much of a buffer there. So essentially what that rate increase is doing for us is just making sure that we can survive year over year and provide with a small cushion to plan for some sort of catastrophic event. Is 830,000 going to get Ron enough to repair a major water line? No, but at least it will get us somewhere and we can start with something.
Buy a lot of bottled water.
Yeah, a lot of bottled water. In that system, one of the things that we discussed as part of the utility rate review was the current age of that system. So based on our existing, what's in the ground today and what we can replace over time, the average age of that system is about 160 years old if we continue where we're at today. Some of those water lines most of those water lines are not designed to last for 160 years. So this is certainly one of those budgets where we spend a lot of time, I guess I'll say, chasing our tails. We are more reactive than we are proactive. And again, that's just the age of our system, the number of distribution lines that we have, the treatment plant, the new treatment plant we have, thankfully, kind of helps with keeping some of those costs down on the treatment side because it is new. But certainly throwing $1.1 million at new filters is not helpful to us and will hurt in the long run because that's faster than we had anticipated when that facility was built. Questions regarding the water utility? Hopping over to the wastewater utility, starting with page 235. Total expenditures for the year are down 12.2%. We do have $12.1 million that we have set aside in reserve for future projects at the wastewater treatment plant. And there are sizable projects coming within the next 5 to 10 years. A master plan is near completion at this point that will highlight kind of the areas in which we have some shortcomings related to that plant and what we will need to upgrade. And we know as staff that number, the 12.1 million won't cover it. But there will be some sizable needs at the treatment plant that we will have to discuss in the future. If you remove the unappropriated expenditures, that reserve, really expenditures are down 34% compared to the prior year budget. Rate increases for this utility, we had a 3.5% rate increase. And I do want to add real fast that while water is 2% and wastewater is 3.5%, and you'll see storm drainage here in a second, the overall impact to a average residential customer was about 3.03%. So we do our best certainly to kind of position these rates so that what we are looking at is kind of more of a CPI increase to just cover, what expenses have gone up over the past 12 months, basically. With that 3.5%, we're trying to do some future planning. Again, we've talked about the major needs that will be needed at that plant in future fiscal years. And since we don't have that master plan done, I'm not going to necessarily spit out a number that we may retract later, but they are sizable, I can tell you for sure. The fund balance in that fund at the end of 2025 is a mere $122,000. That gives me nothing if something were to happen. Yes, we have money set aside in a reserve that if we absolutely had to tap it in an emergency, we could. But again, we're trying to save that money for future wastewater treatment plant upgrades to be good stewards for the community as much as we possibly can. But that $122,000 ending fund balance leaves us no room for margin of error. We do have a small contingency budgeted there of 172,000 that we can utilize in the event that we need something. Similar to the water system, the current age of the wastewater system is about 170 years. That's even older. There's a lot of old pipe in the ground here and a lot of catch up for this community at some point. Thankfully, again, I'll knock on some wood, and I'm sure Jason is cursing at me back here. But we are just holding our breath, essentially. But again, we're doing what we can to keep rates as low as possible, and to ensure that at least we have a working system. Storm drainage utility, I'm going to take you back a few pages. We're going back to 225. Total expenditures in the storm drainage utility are down 32.9%. Somebody's bound to say, Brandon, that's a lot. You're right, but that's because storm drainage doesn't get a lot of money. It is not a huge moneymaker by any means. None of these are moneymakers, to be honest. Again, we're trying to get by with the system that we have and tackle problems as they arise. If you remove the unappropriated, again, saving for future project needs, expenditures are down 28 year budget. The rate increase in this fund was 10%, but 10% on the water fund when that rate I think is, well, I don't even know what the current rate is. I forget, 4 or something.
Yeah, it didn't move it up much. It was, I've got that number right in front of me, actually. Somewhere.
It moved the rate from $4.82 up to $5.30.
There you go.
So it's not a huge, 10% seems like a big number, but the rate for storm drainage is not high as it is. Again, some future planning. This fund only generates about $750,000 in revenue a year. It's not a lot to do any sort of major capital projects with. So this is a fund in which we essentially bring in revenue, hold on to it for a little while, make some interest earnings, and try to plan for future upgrades or new storm drainage systems, whatever, or changes that come down from the state level, because this is certainly one of those areas in which the state has specific mandates on how we treat water collection. We do have some small capital projects planned for the fiscal year, but again, these are tiny in size compared to what you see on the water and wastewater side in capital expenditures. And the fund balance at the end of 2025 is slated to be about 290,000 at year end.
Brandon, that's different than what's in the book on 225 or 2226.
Mm-hmm. So this, what you see in your budget book specifically is a combination of both the storm drainage fund and the related system development charges. So each of the system development funds does have a little bit extra set in that.
Yeah, that confuses me.
Maybe we'll split that out next year instead of combining them. Other questions? Okay. Moving on to the general fund. So I will try to spend a little bit of time covering some of the stuff that we discussed yesterday, because again, this is an agenda item for today. So we want to make sure anybody watching or folks that were hoping to hear things about it can hear about it today. Overall, revenue in the general fund is up 5.29%. While I say that, the property tax revenue in that fund is down 1%. The reason for that is we have, and we'll talk about it a little bit more when we get to the Urban Renewal Agency, but there is an active plan in this budget to accelerate some of the debt service payments on the Northwest URD so that we can try to collapse that before its existing collapse. There are debt service payments over there that are slated to go until 2032, I think it is. And we are hoping to finish those up by the end of 2027, pay off all that debt and close that urban renewal district. The thought process behind that is the largest urban renewal district. It is the fund that generates about, I think it's like 1.8 or $1.6 million a year. All of that is tax proceeds that could go to other taxing districts, including us. So by closing that urban renewal district, the city of Lebanon, for example, would see about an extra $300,000, almost $350,000 in property tax revenue that we don't currently receive because the URD is taking it for debt service payments. So we have put together a plan in-house to, those items are the technical term is callable, but we have the ability to pay them off early, but we need to make sure that we have the revenue in hand to do so. So we are planning to take a little bit of extra money out of property taxes this year for us, from the Lebanon Fire District, from Lynn County, from the school district, and other taxing districts, to pay that off as soon as possible. We have communicated this with all of our partners in each of those governmental organizations, so they are aware this is coming. We didn't necessarily want this to be a surprise when they suddenly
Hold up just a
lost a
second,
chunk of their
Brandon.
revenue.
Nice one. Be nice when we're in the library.
That guy enjoys that horn too much.
Oh, yeah. Ready.
Good.
So I couldn't hear the last few things. You were saying you had notified Lebanon Fire District and the other.
We notified all of the taxing districts, so that they were aware that this is something that they would see some decreased revenue for the next 2 fiscal years, while we tried to scoop some extra into the urban renewal district. Again, us trying to play nice in the sandbox, but this is something that we believe will help all of us across the city, in trying to return some funds to these organizations. So.
They have to be glad that they're just a couple years away from realizing like some increased revenue from that.
Yeah, I
so.
think so. I think certainly there is a little bit, everybody's ultimately glad about the plan and the ability to speed this up so that instead of 2032, they're seeing that 5 years earlier. That will help some that are struggling financially in other areas. It's not going to save everybody, certainly, but every little bit helps, right? We've had that conversation. So yes, I think that there's ultimately some happiness about the long term, but the short term is, they're going to see a small hit. So they're making sure they can sustain that adjustment over the next couple of fiscal years. Other assumptions in property tax revenue for the coming year. We have the 3% assessed value increase that is allowable per Measure 50. That is a guarantee. And then we have budgeted 1% in overall growth in our taxable properties. This also includes and that gets louder.
Still going.
That's a real train. That ain't one of those short ones.
Long time.
Okay, this also includes a 6% discount and delinquency rate. We had this conversation yesterday. So normal, when property tax bills comes out in the state of Oregon, if you pay all of your bill in November, you get a 3% discount. So we do have that 3% discount assumption here included. The city is also seeing, however, an increase in its delinquency rate. This fiscal year, we are waiting impatiently to see what May will bring. But I can tell you right now that this current fiscal year, our projection says that we'll be down $250,000 in property tax revenue than we had anticipated for the current year. And that is because we are seeing less of it come in over time. So we're trying to wait and see if each of those payments is due in November. I think the next one's February and May. So we're hoping that May, we kind of see that bounce back and that revenue comes back. But right now, we're not necessarily all that optimistic. And so this allows us to play a little bit of caution in next year's forecast by increasing that delinquency rate. Normally, we only do a 4% number here, so that would include the 3% discount and a 1% delinquency. Franchise revenue has increased 19.3%. This is being driven primarily by the franchise fees related to electricity. So again, as we discussed yesterday, those franchise revenues are based on percentages. So the more money the franchisee brings in, then usually we will see an uptick as well. And certainly there have been some significant increases in multiple utilities that individuals pay. And so we're starting to see some extra revenue come in from those items. So that's the reason for the major jump there. Liquor taxes continues to climb. It is one that has climbed for a long time. Whereas if you look at our cigarette tax revenue, for example, we're actually holding that steady, but that has declined over time. And then the state revenue sharing is also increased. For those that are not aware, we do receive specific pots of money from the state that they call state shared revenues. They are items that go into our general fund for essentially discretionary purposes or are allocated by the budget committee through this budget and adopted by the council. They include liquor taxes, a portion of the state's collection and marijuana taxes, cigarette taxes. We do receive the gas tax money, which goes into our street fund. And then there is a line that's just called state shared revenue. And it's money that the state hands down as kind of revenue sharing, what they feel like they can give the cities and counties. Overall, the liquor taxes in that state revenue sharing line, that general line are both up. Marijuana taxes have been falling over time. And that has a lot to do with kind of a major infusion overall in the market. There's a lot of marijuana shops out there and the market's flooded. And so we're not seeing the same tax revenue come in that we used to see in that regard. And prices have come down a lot as well in that because of that flooding. And then cigarette taxes, just like I said, over time, those have declined to a point where all we get from that each year is about $14,000. It's not a lot, but it's still there. So we do have on the agenda later, a public hearing on the use of those state shared revenues. It's a requirement by the state. So we'll tackle that when we get there. Any questions on the revenue side?
Yeah, I think it's important to reiterate and emphasize that the property tax is a conservative projection, especially people will say, well, what about the growth?
Yes, it is a conservative estimate. And the reason we do that, I think this year is a great example. We had planned for the 3% assessed value increase and a 2% growth rate in our property tax base. That did not transpire. And so that is one of those things where then if we shoot too high, we're automatically starting from behind. And then have to change kind of how we structure our expenditures for the year to ensure that we don't exceed what we bring in to the best of our abilities. But certainly we're at a point now too where there is no ability for us to necessarily make those reductions unless we take some significant service reductions or put significant service reductions on the table. So while we don't necessarily want to say there's going to be zero increase because that's a little too, what's the word I'm looking for? Unfathomable. We will see an increase. We don't necessarily either want to swing for the fence and overshoot that. So this is a conservative estimate. On the expenditure side, A major portion of the general fund is personnel. There's not really a way around that. Government services are heavy people-driven. And so 60% of our overall expenditures, if you remove the contingency from consideration, is dedicated to personnel. And that includes salary and benefits and any related taxes that the city has to pay for employee taxes. The transfers out, that orange section, the only transfers out that occur are transfers to those internal service funds that we discussed previously. So they fund those administrative services or business services that are provided to the organization, in this case, within the general fund. And there is a small amount that is going to the pension obligation bond. This number for the 2025 proposed budget year is significantly lower in the pension obligation bond transfer than we've seen in the last few fiscal years. The reason for that is several years ago, the city made the choice to pay one of our debt payments related to that bond early. And so as a result, we don't have to make a principal payment on that debt this year. So all we are paying is the interest associated with that bond, which actually is kind of helpful in this case because it'll keep some of the additional monies in the general fund and related departments. But that transfer should bounce back next year to when that principal payment becomes due again. We will be paying that PERS obligation bond payment through 2028 fiscal year, and then it will fall off at that point. There is a small debt service line in this budget. One question I did receive yesterday was in regards to that debt service. So if you look at the general fund and specifically there's too many pages. 173. So you'll see in the past that debt service payment has ranged has been about $122,000 over the last couple of fiscal years. What we are proposing for next year is to accelerate that debt payment and essentially pay the entire thing off in 2025 so that the general fund no longer has that obligation moving forward. That would mean paying about $580,000 next year to cover, and that's the interest piece is our best guess on what we will be charged in interest earnings there, or interest expenses there. But ultimately, the idea is we finish this off now instead of paying through 2029. The longevity means, or the shortening of that means that we will save about $40,000, $44,000 over the next 5 years. Certainly the question was, is that a reasonable savings, or should we continue to make that payment as planned through 2029? I'd say ultimately that one's kind of up to this committee. The $44,000 savings is certainly beneficial in the long run, but again, it does take then a sizable chunk of general fund dollars to make that whole payment in this next fiscal year. Spreading that out just means that, there's about $400,000 less next year that could reside in the general fund making interest. Anything sitting in all of our funds earn interest at about 5.2% right now. So, we certainly could sit on that and spread that back out so that we get to keep that extra money. But at least our initial proposal was that we accelerate this so that it is done, out of the way, and gives you an accurate view of really what is true expenditures in the general fund moving forward, while providing you with a little bit of savings.
Brandon, do you know if holding that, it was 589, is that what it was? I'm looking for the line on 579. So does that push the red, when we hit red, does that push it back a year?
It does not.
It doesn't change anything.
No. So when we get to looking at page 176, the first year that we hit an ending fund balance with a deficit balance is 2027. The $400,000 that you would save by spreading that payment back out through 29 is not going to tie off that $1.1 million deficit in 27. It certainly would contribute, but you're not gonna spin it the other way.
And the actual difference, I guess, would be, you said we're paying 120,000?
It's about 122,000 a year for principal and interest.
So it's actually not a $580,000 savings, it'd be a
Right, it's
300 and some thousand
yeah,
dollars.
something near, it's close to 400,000 is what you would end up
Spending-
not paying in
We're
this.
spending 400,000 more. I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of paying off the loan and not paying that interest. I asked that proposal just to see if that would push back us going into the red
Right,
another 6 months or another year while we're figuring out
sure.
ways to.
You know, I would say coupled with other adjustments, if we're making other changes over the next several fiscal years, then, you know, it certainly could be a contributing amount to helping push that back, but it singularly is not going to push it back.
Just yield wise, I mean, we're doing this at our own homes right now with CDs and savings accounts. What are we paying on that? What's our $122,000 a month payment? What interest rate's that paying on versus the 5% we'd get if that money stayed in our coffers and got 5%?
That's a good question. I can answer that in just a second.
And interest rates are, well, rumored to be heading down fairly sharply very soon. So to say we're going to earn,
We are in on our, I'm just trying to get a comparison for.
I know, but I just want the committee to keep in mind that it's earning 5 point something today. But 6 months from now, when we are living this actual budget, it's possible that it's at 1.7 again, or probably not that quickly, but it could be significantly less 6 months, a year from now.
So the interest expense on that debt is about it's just over 3%. It's 3.125. So, I mean, certainly we would receive a little bit more in interest earnings if we hold on to the money in this current fiscal year versus sending it all out the door now. But again, yes, that assumes then too that over the next 4 or 5 years, that interest rates don't come down to a point below the 3.125. It's hard for me to believe that interest rates would fall that far, given where they're at today, but it certainly is not unheard of. You go from, so right now we're spending about $1.6 million more than we're bringing in. So you'd bring that down to 1.2.
I mean, that does sound better, you know. 1.2 sounds better than spending 1.6, but it also, like if you're running a business to pay off the loan sooner and save interest, but like Dave was saying, would it actually come close to balancing out if we're making a little bit more than we're paying? I don't know. That'd take a little bit of number crunching, I think.
Yeah, you know, I think the $44,000 that we save by paying it off now, are you going to get $44,000 on that essentially $400,000 over the next 5 years? And yeah, that would take some number crunching, but, and again, assuming that the market stays kind of where it's at, right? But if you plan in for a decrease in what the Federal Reserve does with interest rates, I think you're going to either come close to breaking even, or maybe you're going to lose a little bit in interest earnings compared to what you're doing right now.
I like the original plan of ditching the debt as soon as possible. It feels more fiscally responsible to me than trying to hedge our bets on what interest rates are going to do. I mean, I think we've all here kind of been surprised over the last 10, 15 years how unpredictable interest rates are, and not the debt is a real liability. I would get rid of the debt.
I was just going to ask a question on if we got rid of the debt, how's that affect our rating, credit rating as a city? Does it improve
Yeah,
it?
it wouldn't change that. I don't think it's a small enough item that, one, we're not necessarily planning today to go out for anything. But certainly anytime we can take a liability off the books, it's going to look better for raters in the future. As you can see in the kind of the back pages of your book, we have a sizable amount of debt that we hold on to right now, outstanding debt. And so anytime we can take something off the books looks favorable to the city, and the decision makers that be.
Well, I'm a proponent for doing that. I do it in my personal life. If I have debt and I can get rid of it, I get rid of it. There are those moments
I'm
where,
just being honest.
where you look at the
I had a car
percentage.
payment that was better to not pay off and to,
Yeah.
I mean, not just a micro version. It's better to keep my car payment at 2% and leave my money in a 5% CD. I would hope that as we're making budget planning and we say, hey, we're making 5.5% on our money, we know how long we're locked in to make that for. Do we?
No, so right now, all of our existing cash is tied up with the local government investment pool, and that rate changes essentially based on Federal Reserve action.
Gotcha.
It's not, we don't have it locked into a CD or, placed into a 5-year bond option or something like that. It's not invested in a timed pot of money.
Okay.
So it is.
Math in my head to say we're not just doing this for looks and cutting revenue out the other side.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think part of the decision here when we decided to propose this for you is we don't know what the future is going to hold in as far as interest earnings. And because the city doesn't have much of a developed investment portfolio, something we could certainly consider, but maybe after we solve some other issues. We don't have an idea of what that long term looks like, right? And we know at this point the interest rates are probably at their peak. I don't see an instance in which the Federal Reserve raises interest rates at this point, just based on where the economy is at and what the future seems to hold.
And there's an election coming up.
Well, there's that. Consumer confidence. There was a report that came out today. Consumer confidence is down again. Certainly I think the economy is kind of at that peak level where eventually we are going to see interest rates come down. I can't tell you how fast
No,
because
I live this every day, and that's
Yeah.
what I do
Yeah.
in my day job.
Right.
So I just want to make sure we're covering our bases and that people understand why we're doing it and the complexities of it as much as they can.
we think it's
the-
the best option.
To finish my thought, I know there's times where you do make those calculations, you look at where the best place to put your money is.
Mhm.
I get all that. But man, if we can take debt off the books, I'm okay with that. So,
Yeah, I think it would look better to say we only spent 1.2 million more than 1.6, but I think it passes a straight face test when you can tell, if someone comes up and asks, where'd all that money, how are you spending that money? Well, we paid off $500,000 worth of debt. I think generally people would be happy with that. So I'm all for keeping it the same.
Yep.
Scott asked the questions.
This is a good question to ask.
well, Dave, your question's a very good question.
Yes.
That happens sometime, right?
And you do have to take those into account. Because if we're, yeah. What's his head starting to swell?
That chance of that
But
around
this
here.
is not that moment.
All right. I don't have anything else that I had prepared as far as the general fund is concerned. I was going to kind of take the direction of the committee to see if there's something else you wanted to see, if there's anything else you wanted me to run through regarding either the 5-year forecast again. Did you have any questions? And then we can kind of move towards the approval process of this, or the approval step of this process.
I don't really have a question necessarily about this, but I would hope there's people watching this. We've all gotten some feedback on what we're doing here. I appreciate these people who are here on this budget committee. I would strongly suggest, we've seen it, people say, why don't they tell us what's going on with this budget? 2 years ago, I was that guy and I didn't know I could just go find all this stuff. If you're out there listening, get involved. If you're gonna really be involved in our town that we all love so much, get involved and don't just hate from behind a screen, but actually get involved and understand what you're talking about. We are here to save money, but we are not going to save ourselves out of what we're in right now. We have, it's gonna cost us all more to stay alive. It's happening in all of our lives. Just have to say that.
Could we do a quick recap of everything that was done to save money for the general fund, out of the general fund this year? Am I asking for something that's not so quick, but,
Nope, nope, I
okay.
have it, just have to pop it open. Let's see.
Just as to reiterate and a reminder for those who may be watching, and then also for myself.
Okay, so specifically in the general fund, we are, across the organization, the budget has a 9.75 FTE reduction for personnel. And so what that means is that's 9 full-time positions and then 3/4 time for overall. That includes, a couple of increases. So your budget document outlines specifically where those reductions are occurring. The primary reductions are happening in the general fund and the internal service funds that then contribute to what the general fund will save as a result. And any increase in FTE in any particular fund is because it is grant driven, and is negligible at best. It's not major increases. So specifically for what we are looking at for the general fund next year, the specific positions and the reallocations, and this does not include the 2 parks positions. So my apologies, I can grab that in a second, but absent the 2 parks positions, we anticipate that we will save almost $432,000 next year in personnel expenditures. That's on top of material and service reductions we made in the prior year, that totaled about $190,000. So all in, we are close to about $600,000 in reductions across the organization. We have some required increases for cost of living based on our union contracts. But as was discussed earlier, the management team for the city is not receiving any cost of living adjustments for the coming fiscal year in this budget, not that was proposed. And then the 2 parks positions, you're looking at about $200,000 in additional savings. However, I will put a caveat on that losing the school district contract, as we discussed yesterday, means that offsets that by about $155,000. So your actual savings with those parks positions is about $45,000. So we have done everything as a staff that we believe, at least right this moment, without additional vetting, which we will continue to do. We believe we have made the reductions that we can make that will allow us to continue operating where we are today, albeit maybe occasionally a little slower at times, but does not take out significant programs as a result.
Plus, we cut the stipends.
Yes, which was
Just had to throw that.
38,000 or something like that.
I did not hear that.
Oh, the city councilor and mayor stipends, we eliminated also, so.
There we go. So all of these figures, we have a fire levy upcoming. Is this all predicated on the fact that that's going to pass and that we're not going to have any increased liability for the fire department?
Yeah, if that levy passes, I mean, that levy does not impact us as a city organization, regardless of whether it passes or not. Our property taxes, for example, are permanent rates. And so any challenge from compression as a result of that levy passing is going to hit, the county and the fire district before it even remotely comes to us. So everything in this budget is based on, what the city is going to see as a result of any outside action, at least that we are aware of today, right? Certainly regulations change on a darn near daily basis, it feels like sometimes. We're still pending as Ron and Jason talked about yesterday, we're still pending the outcome on our permits from DEQ. So this is everything as we know it today.
Any other questions, comments?
I do want to take a second I did receive a list of questions from one Budget Committee member, and I want to kind of touch on some of them that I think we haven't necessarily touched on throughout the presentations. So if the committee will entertain me for just a few more moments, then we can move on to the next step. So one of the questions was, why are there two account IDs for current property taxes? So the city does have two different property taxes that it levies. One is our permanent rate, what we always allocate every year. The second is for a general obligation bond that was a community-driven item. It was voted on by the citizens inside city limits to construct the Justice Center and the library. So we allocate, or that brings in about $1.6 million, $1.7 million a year in additional property taxes outside of the Measure 5 limitations to pay for the debt service on those buildings. So that's why we see two different current property taxes come from. The expiration on that is 2027, 8? I think it falls off in fiscal year 28 is when we make the last payment for those items.
And you said how much a year we're paying on that?
That's 1.6 million each year. And that is, once that falls off, then absent something else, then that is dollars that will go back to the citizens' pockets from their property taxes. So. One of the questions for the general fund is why there was no franchise fees for Peak. We don't know really what the Peak franchise is going to bring us. It is still in its infancy. They're still building out their infrastructure in town. So we did budget zero until we really get an idea or feel what that might bring in. As it ramps up, it's going to kind of start slow and then maybe get up to a point where it yields us some significant dollars. But we don't really know what that's going to bring, and we didn't want to take a stab in the dark at
There
that.
was like $21 or something in an entry, odd little
In
amount.
prior fiscal years, there's been a tiny bit, but it so far is still being developed. So. Another question, can the city recover some of the cost of the membrane filters? I think Jason kind of covered some of this yesterday. That's an ongoing conversation. We will hope to know more down the road, but there's not a lot we can say there as we work through the process. Certainly, hopefully we can see something.
But if you're successful, does that?
Make sure to talk into the mic.
This year,
They can't hear you in the back.
if you're successful, does that knock this 1.6 down? Is that where that money then goes if you?
Yeah, if there is any sort of remuneration for, what we are having to do in advance of what our original schedule stated, that would go back into the water fund. And offset the $1.1 million that we're currently budgeted to spend on those membrane filters in the future. It could also be that some of that goes, Jason, the Public Works Director, talked about pretreatment necessities in the future. So any sort of revenue that we see from that could go into the fund to be spent on some sort of pretreatment construction in the future. But all of that would stay with water because it is related to the water system. Another question is the reallocation of council chambers wholly paid for by ARPA funds, and can this be postponed? The answer to that is mostly. So not wholly paid. All of the IT, the sound systems, the TVs, the live streaming, all of that stuff would be covered by ARPA funds to this point. Any additional costs related to the construction of a new dais in that space would likely need to come from city funds of some kind. Could the school resource officer be redeployed as a patrol officer, or is this position paid for by the school district? We have seen over the last probably we have needed additional patrol officers on the street. And so we have, our police chief did redistribute that individual to patrol for a little while to help cover some of the the blank spots. It is something then that that position is 75% funded by the school district. And the idea behind that is 9 months out of the year, 75% of the time, they're in the schools. So as a result, we are going to see a little bit less this fiscal year in regards to that contract because we needed them for patrol, but our first priority, honestly, is providing those patrol services. And so we did scoop that person back to provide patrol services, and we'll see the related change as a result. One question we didn't get into yesterday, what happened to safety and training? Was a position or function eliminated? The answer to that is yes. The city had a safety and training coordinator. They left the organization, and at that time, the decision was made to make that one of those items that could be a cost reduction. There is a small amount budgeted for safety and training, about $3,000 for next fiscal year to support the work of the safety committee, which will still continue. But as far as the actual position and some of that coordination regarding safety and training, that is gone for the next fiscal year. The big decrease in this question was, why is there such a big decrease in revenue for the wastewater utility? What were the other sources funds in prior years, and what are state loan funds? So for the last 3 years, probably, the wastewater side has been heavily focused on the west side interceptor and building out a new sewer line of sorts. Yeah. Anyways, that was a very expensive project overall. Some of that money was funded by ARPA. I think we allocated overall about $3 million to that. The rest of it is a loan that we received from the state to complete that construction and essentially increase capacity on the south end of town. That project is complete now at this time, maybe, right?
Yes, other than striping.
And so we don't plan for the capital expenditure that you'd seen in prior years, and the state loan funds aren't going to continue to come in because we've received everything that we're going to receive. However, you will see now an increase on the debt service side because now we have to start paying that back. So it's just that it won't be at the same volume that we were bringing it in necessarily, but we'll see a small increase on the debt side to take care of that. That's really all I have, unless there's any other questions from the committee.
No? All right, I think before we open the first public hearing, we should take a 10-minute recess.
Reading my mind.
All right, let's get started again. I think before we open the public hearing, Brandon had another note, an adjustment for us.
Yes, so a couple of small things that have popped up over the last few weeks since we put together your original budget, and I will throw this on the screen here. Oh, biscuits. Okay, so specifically what we are requesting are these two changes. So we are requesting that we add $110,000 in expenditure authority to Fund 820. That is our equipment acquisition and reserve fund. I'd like to place that in Public Works. There's some stuff upcoming that they would like to purchase. That is an ongoing thing that we expect to be completed in this fiscal year, and we expect to complete that using an interfund loan process. This expenditure authorization would allow me to repay that interfund loan in the next fiscal year. That money does exist in the fund for the purpose, and I can't go too much into it because it's an active negotiation at this time. But that's what we are requesting to budget for next year for the purpose of repaying an interfund loan. Secondly, we would like $30,000 in the general fund for the purchase of a council dais. We don't know. We think it will come in less than that 30,000, but that gives us a little bit of flexibility if it's necessary. The offset here that we are hoping is with that relocation. So part of the presentation yesterday, we discussed that we're spending about $10,500 in utilities on this building a year, plus the associated water costs, water and sewer costs. We anticipate that if nothing else changes, we'll be able to put that money back into the fund by not spending those utilities. Additionally, though, however, depending on what happens with this building, we anticipate some sort of revenue that would go back to the general fund to support the purchase of this dais. So either way, we think that within the next 3 fiscal years, we'd be able to pay that back through savings of some kind. Those are the two changes that I have for you at this moment.
I'm understanding that 30,000. Could you go over the 110,000 one more time? That's for the water fund?
I can't say a lot.
I got,
It's an executive session discussion.
Gotcha. All right, well,
It's an unfortunately a necessary step for me to make sure that we can repay what we are going to do this year, because the act is going to require an interfund loan.
So
and I
this
need
is
to-
something the council is aware of, and, and that's the direction the council wants. That's good enough for me.
Yeah, this is a council action. Yeah, it wouldn't hurt to formalize that.
you might be off.
I'll say it louder. Move to approve the changes.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right.
Thank you.
And that's it.
That's all I have.
Okay, then we will move on. We'll open the first public hearing. First public hearing is state share revenues. It's now open at 1:45 PM.
Oh, I can give you a brief report, I guess. So, sorry. So, state shared revenues we discussed fairly recently in this conversation, but ultimately we receive money from the state for various taxes that are imposed on specific goods and services. That money comes into it comes to the city, is deposited into the general fund, and it is used for discretionary purposes. It just becomes a part of paying for police services, library, senior center, municipal court, planning, all the stuff that is in the general fund. So each year we're required to hold this public hearing to essentially ask for the community to provide some input on what they would like us to use that state shared revenue for, or if they have an issue with it remaining where it is. And at that point, I'll leave it open to public comment.
All right, any questions or comments from the Budget Committee? Okay, is there anyone in the public who'd like to speak on this matter? No? Then the public hearing is hereby closed at 1:47 PM. All further discussion will be limited to the Budget Committee and staff. And I would say, is there a motion?
I move to recommend the City of Lebanon City Council accept state revenue sharing monies as non-dedicated revenue in the general fund.
We have a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, that motion carries. Let's see, next up. Now it's time to approve the budget. This is the fiscal year 24-25 proposed City of Lebanon budget. And I'll turn it back over to Brandon.
Thank you. At this time, we've gone through everything related to the proposed budget for the City of Lebanon. Hearing no other changes or questions, we move to this step where the Budget Committee needs to approve and recommend that the council adopt a budget for the coming fiscal year. This next step then, once it's completed, we'll push the document as amended with the changes that you just approved recently out to the community for notification of another public hearing with the city council. And then the city council will adopt, or if they have any changes they'd like to make those changes and then adopt. With those changes, I do have a revision to the motion, the second motion there on your sheet, which I will throw up on the screen when it is appropriate for that motion to be made. But unless there's any other questions, we've been through all of the city's budget over the last couple of days, and I don't have anything to add.
I'm ready.
Read it.
Can I do it?
Not yet. We have to make sure there's no one in the
Oh,
public
yes.
who'd like to comment on this. Seeing none,
I would like to,
Yep.
can I make a comment?
please.
I wanted to make a comment. There is no public here. That's why there's no public comment.
Oh, thank you. Since there's no public comments, the public hearing is hereby closed at 1:49 PM. Is there any more comments, questions between the Budget Committee, staff? Is everyone good with this budget? Looks like we're ready for motion.
I move to recommend the City of Lebanon City Council levy the permanent property tax rate of $5.136 per thousand of assessed value for operating expenses and $1,856,562 for payment of bond principal and interest.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion also carries unanimously. All right, public hearing for the proposed budget is closed.
Mm-mm.
Nope,
do.
nope, sorry.
Oh, you have another motion.
We have one more here. Proposed urban rural district taxes.
And with actually, we have one more motion to make related to
Oh,
the
did I
proposed
miss it?
city budget. And that motion is on your screen based on the changes that you reviewed a minute ago.
Go ahead. You're
Ready?
doing good.
I move to approve the fiscal year 2024-2025 budget in the amount of $66,892,541 as proposed by the city's budget officer and recommend the City of Lebanon City Council adopt the fiscal year budget.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is approved. Okay. I think that's it for that section, right, Brandon?
That is it.
Okay, then that public hearing is closed at 1:51 PM. Now we're going to adjourn as the City of Lebanon Budget Committee and convene as the Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee. I think the mayor is the committee chair on this.
Mm-mm.
Mm-mm. Still you.
You are.
Still me? Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
still you.
What are you trying to do?
I'm just trying to pass it back.
Nice try.
Good, try to shift that.
All the way.
Thank you.
The mayor's had it
So
easy.
do we have a presentation on this, Brandon?
I have a small staff report that I can provide once we open the public hearing.
Okay, we will open the public hearing for the Lebanon urban budget renewal, sorry, urban renewal district taxes at 1:52 PM.
Okay, so for the Urban Renewal Agency, geez, I can't talk now either. You all have received a copy of that budget. Total expenditures for the fiscal year are $2,839,366. What that includes is debt service payments for the Northwest Urban Renewal District, along with a little bit on, I think there's a debt item on Cheetah Lake, if I remember correctly. But also includes the, I guess we'll call it spin up of projects in the North Gateway URD. And I can punt over to Ron if you have any specific questions about the capital projects that will happen in that urban renewal district. But basically, we are moving forward with the district plan to provide some infrastructure improvements in that district. We also do have some staff time that is being allocated out that direction in the engineering department to accommodate that work. But this $2.8 million budget is what is necessary in the Urban Renewal Agency to complete everything for next year.
So we're getting prepped in the Urban Renewal District up there to do North Fifth Street. We're under contract with a couple of different consulting firms right now to do traffic signal warrant analysis at the intersection of Fifth and Tangent Streets. And then also, we've got the initial survey done for that project as well. So it'll likely take us a good year, if not more, because we've got to deal with the railroad up there, getting underneath the railroad with new utilities. And then at some point in the near future, likely if everything works early next summer, we would look to sell a bond in that urban renewal district to pay for the project. And then there's a couple of other projects out there, signal at Reeves and Highway 20 that would also potentially be coming online at some point in the near future. So those are the projects that we're talking about.
Is there an order for the Fifth and Tangent one before the Reeves? Okay.
And we may, depending on how interest rates are and timing of the mill race work up there, we may try and tie those two projects together. Just we'll see how things play out. It may work out and it may not. So.
As a reminder for the now Urban Renewal Agency Board that you are now, the Northwest Urban Renewal District, this plan allows for the district to start taking in additional tax dollars to then accelerate debt service payments in hopes that we can collapse that URD in 2028. Again, that is something we have discussed with local partners to ensure that they are all aware that it will eat into their tax revenue a little bit for the coming 2 or 3 fiscal years. But this is a plan to make sure that everybody can get those dollars back to them as soon as possible. So that's included in this proposal.
All right. I'd ask for public comments, but there's no public, so we're going to move on. The public testimony portion is closed. Is there a motion? I just look at you because you keep saying it, so.
I just want to get this stuff moving. Okay. So the first motion under Urban Renewal District taxes, I move to recommend the Urban Renewal Agency approve the Northwest Lebanon URD taxes for fiscal year 24-25 at the tax increment value of $1.684161 million. Can I say it like that? $1,684,161, Brandon. I could tell by your face you didn't like the way I did that.
Thank you.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Keep going. I move to recommend the Urban Renewal Agency approve the Cheetah Lake URD taxes for fiscal year 2024-25 at the rate of 100% of the amount of the division of tax.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
I move to recommend the Urban Renewal Agency approve the North Gateway URD taxes for fiscal year 2024, 2025 at the rate of 100% of the amount from the division of tax.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
I move to recommend the Urban Renewal Agency approve the downtown URD taxes for fiscal year 2024, 2025 at the rate of 100% of the amount from the division of tax.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that motion carries.
I move to recommend the Urban Renewal Agency approve the mill race URD taxes for fiscal year 2024, 2025 at the rate of 100% of the amount from the division of tax.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion is approved. All right. Now, we're going to close that. Nope, still going. Okay.
Still on.
Proposed urban renewal budget. Do you have a presentation on this, Brandon?
No, we kind of talked about that already before you did the tax division piece. So I don't have anything to add.
All right, then I guess there's no public comment. There's no public here. Is there a motion?
I move to recommend the Urban Renewal Agency fiscal year 2024, 2025 budget in the sum of $2,839,366 as proposed by the agency's budget officer and recommend the City of Lebanon City Council adopt the fiscal year budget.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. All right.
That was
you-
Budget Committee, Tom Wells. I can tell Julie is looking to see who made the second.
Now you can adjourn.
All right, we're going to adjourn as the Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee and reconvene as the City of Lebanon Budget Committee.
There you go.
All right. I guess, are there any public comments? No? Okay. Then next scheduled budget meeting.
We don't have one. So this is the end of the process for this year. I do want to quickly say thank you to all of you. This is a very detailed process. I know that reading through both of those budget documents is no small feat. It is one that I look forward to every year and appreciate all the time and energy you put into this. Yes, I might be crazy for liking it, but your contributions to this committee are paramount to ensuring that this community has a budget and a city that operates in the manner that it sees fit. So thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing all of you back on this committee again next year.
I want to say this is really the clearest, most comprehensive budget that I've been through, and I've been through a lot of these. So I really appreciate your time, staff's time. This really seemed to make a lot more sense to me. So thank you.
If you could just make the numbers actually bounce a little better next time, it looks that good.
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate what Rebecca said.
Thank you very much.
This is, I forget, either my 11th or 12th time doing this. Thank you, Rebecca. You're welcome. And this is the cleanest and most transparent that I've seen. And the nice thing is, we've been talking about all this stuff in open council for about 3 months. So none of this was a real surprise. And we got it in plenty of time, not 4 days before we have to pass it by state law, which is tremendous. And all the directors, you guys did a great job with this. You made it clear as a bell. So thank you very much. And I like the way that everybody worked together on this. It's very refreshing from what we've had in the past. And this is a great one.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for everybody.
I would also like to say thank you to all the directors, the whole budget committee, and also our chair for doing such a
Oh,
great
yeah.
job.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Secretary really did a great job.
yeah,
too.
yeah.
Yeah. I
So-
just read what Julie
Worked
told
hard. I
me
want
to.
to see those notes later, Dave.
So we'll just continue working hard to try to close that structural deficit in the future, and that's all we can do, is just keep our eye on it and keep working hard. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. This meeting is adjourned.
Wait,
Oh,
don't adjourn it yet. Don't hit that gavel.
this
So
meeting is
we need.
not adjourned.
It is not adjourned. We need one clarification in regards to the motion you made earlier about the council stipends. as it sits right now, it seems like it is kind of a definitive. We just wanted to clarify whether this is for the next fiscal year, 2025, and then will be reevaluated in the future, or if this is a permanent action,
It feels,
Or until you,
or until.
it
Yeah,
feels
or
like
until
that's a council decision for me. For me, I like us just leaving this decision like this, like we have it for this year. And then will you guys be discussing that further then in council?
I think it's important for us to discuss that because that's something that affects future councils.
Yes.
And the thought process I have is maybe this is something we do right now until the budget's corrected and then it's reinstated. So there is a sunset to it. Because I know in the future, there'll be a council, we'll be all long gone, there'll be a council and they'll, who wants to get up on a council and go, I think we should get paid.
Right.
This was already established a long time ago, and I don't know the reasons why they established that stipend. I really don't. If someone does know, please educate me. But I think there should be a sunset to it once the budget is corrected and it's doing well, then it can be reinstated. So I think we need to discuss that maybe at a council meeting.
Yeah, we can do that. So one of the questions you asked is why was it put into place? It was put into place to cover things like, you especially go to a lot of different meetings, that you're required at, to pay for your mileage, fuel, and sometimes, food if you're not going to a specific conference. Same thing with the council. You guys have obligations outside of just coming to a council meeting that was what the intention of that was to cover some of those costs.
For the stipend or?
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
So barring any concerns, staff, and as far as that motion is concerned, is going to take that to mean the budget committee is freezing those stipends for the coming fiscal year as part of their budget review, and then it'll be reevaluated by the council.
Yeah.
Acceptable?
Yeah, that's
I
fine.
agree with that, yes.
Now I will leave you be.